Hello and welcome to episode 16 of the LNUR Line podcast for LEGO train fans. Today we're going to be talking to our members about the private member wagon models we've released this year and the previous year. So welcome to our members in the podcast. We'll start with Matt, our producer.
Hello.
Andrew, our podcast runner.
Hiya.
Trace.
Hey, howdy.
Will.
Hello.
Henry.
Hello.
Luke and Jamie.
Hello there.
Hello, everyone.
Okay, great. So, as usual, we're going to move on to some LEGO train news, and we only have, I think, one item which Trace is going to cover for us.
That's the Bricklink designer program, right, Richard?
Yes.
Awesome. So yeah, essentially what Bricklink's doing is they've partnered with the LEGO home website or the LEGO Ideas team. And so now they've started what they're calling the 10K Club, which is any project that gets released through Ideas that reaches that 10K goal of people who think it's follow it or like the idea or support the idea. If it reaches that 10K, it goes into sort of this long, tedious isn't the right word, but this long, unnecessary process of evaluation, making sure everything's okay, field testing, market testing, and then from there, it hopefully gets pushed through and becomes a real set, which is great because a lot of these 10K sets that are being done have a wide variety of appeal. We have, looking at the page right now, we have, it looks like small dioramas, we have sculpting, we have mini builds, we've got boats, we do have a big old train station that I think we're kind of interested in or maybe on the fence of, but it's nice to see diversity come through. And so having all these projects come in, essentially what they do is after they reach 10K, if it's a digital model, it gets evaluated by the LEGO Ideas team. They see if all the parts work, if the people need to redefine the design. If so, then it moves into the test building phase, which is when it's physical testing. Does the build hold up? Is it structurally sound? Is it something that's going to be appealing as let's say, a collector series model, or is it more of a play set or a kit? Afterwards, it'll move on to production, where it'll be, marketed, mass-produced, and then available to the public, which is great. So I guess the appeal for us with them rolling out this program is it's opportunity for more realistic train designs or more idyllic train designs. If someone can get enough support behind one of their ideas, that opens up a new market for a set with a lot of pieces that can be repurposed for other mocks or that can be interpreted into the actual design that's great for any layout. It's a lot of hope. It's a lot of speculation. But I think overall it's going to be a good thing.
Great, thank you, Trace. Yeah, hopefully it is an opportunity to see some more LEGO train models that we as adult fans would actually appreciate. But we'll have to see, I suppose.
True. Okay. I mean, if they track with supporting... sorry, just quickly. If they're supporting the LEGO train hobby in the direction they've been going, where we have like 1 or 2 sets a year that allow people to sort of get introduced to the hobby, and then if we can get more sets like the Crocodile that just came out, where it's more intricate and involved, I think it's something that could be beneficial for us who do like the LEGO train hobby.
Yeah, I think hopefully it's only a good thing, and it means maybe things with less appeal than those that actually make it through the LEGO Ideas system are going to be better, because the last round had something like 50 models and probably only 3 of them are going to become sets. So something isn't working with LEGO Ideas on that front, I think. Speaking of LEGO Ideas, it's Will's regular slot on LEGO trains on LEGO Ideas to support.
Yep, we seem to have had a bit of a lack of new railway projects, but I just about managed to scavenge together 5. Heavily American orientated this time, but we'll start with the Tweetsie Railroad. This is a train set, includes quite a lot of minifigures in the track, and is a green American locomotive with 5 brightly coloured touristy coaches. Quite similar to most LEGO train sets in that the coaches are the bare bloody minimum. But the locomotive's quite nice. It's based on the Tweetsie Railroad, which is a narrow gauge sort of theme park heritage railroad in America, North Carolina. The designer has sensibly gone for standard gauge because narrow gauge track doesn't really exist as a set. But it's a very smart little smart locomotive, and I think would make it be quite popular as a set in the same way that the Disney train was popular in the set because it's brightly coloured, it looks different, it's nice. This is designed by somebody called Yukon Queen 19012, which I'm pretty certain is a steam locomotive. It currently has 70 supporters and 53 days left, so it needs a bit of supporting, that one. Next one we have is the Detroit Edison Co. Baldwin 060 switcher number 203. This is based on a very specific switcher, which is on a static display in a park in Marysville, Michigan. It's your standard 060 shunting locomotive with the recognizable sloped tender and rugged looks that most American shunting locos have. Again, it looks like the guy is obviously based it on a real loco and seems to have got a lot of decent details on it. Don't think it's powered. The last one wasn't powered either, by the way. But yeah, it's like a smart loco. It would complement the Crocodile if it comes on one of those bases. This is designed by Cheese in the Pie. Has 64 supporters and 49 days left. Next one, and this is one I pretty much put on just so I can shut my brother up. It is the Union Pacific Big Boy. My brother is of the opinion that if you haven't built a big boy out of Lego yet, are you really Lego training? So I would like to see this set made so I can finally shut him up about it.
Yeah, fair.
As a design itself, I don't know how accurate it is, but it looks like a big boy to me. It looks really detailed, big, hunky chunk of locomotive. I think it'd be a really great sort of companion piece to go with the Crocodile in terms of just static display locomotives. No way Lego would ever bother to try and power it, and if they did, they'd make it look worse, much like everything else they've ever built. So I'd be quite happy to have that as a static display. That is designed by LAS HFL. Has 765 supporters and 413 days left. Now we are on to our European designs, and they've done a Polar Express. So now let's find a new train that everybody makes. Apparently and weirdly, Der Adler is that train, that locomotive, and this one is called the Adler, Germany's first regularly operated train. It is one of about 3 that I spotted, and it's by far the best one. It's got a bit of a display base, and it contains the Adler and 3 assorted heritage-looking coaches. Very smart. I would like to see the boiler redesign because it's very flat and squat. As far as I'm aware, the Adler had a round boiler like most locomotives. But other than that, it's a really nice little design, a little set. It comes with its own display stand, which includes some telegraph wires and a little plate layers hut, and some greebling, which looks quite nice. And yeah, it's a very smart little design. It's designed by Brick Jongular and has 1,350 supporters and 496 days left. And finally, and the one that we all knew I had to talk about, and I'm hopefully going to get the pronunciation of this right, Tallinn Railway, Tallinn and Tywin Wharf Station. I looked up on Google, and I'm pretty certain that's how you pronounce Tywin. This consists of, I believe, a rail station on the Tallinn Line called Tywin Wharf, which is a station building that includes a small museum. The station is much in the same vein as the Disney one. It's a deep relief station, so you've got the front looks like a complete station, but you go around the back and it's actually hollow, allowing you to see the interior of the station, which includes the booking hall, the museum, some offices, restaurant, normal heritage railway stuff. And the set as a whole consists of this very nice station, a loop of narrow gauge track, which would be a problem if it was ever made into a set, unfortunately, and a really nice little representation of one of the Tallinn locomotives, the Tallinn, the locomotive itself, and a couple of a coach and a truck, brake van. I'd love to see this set made. The fact that it relies on narrow gauge track pretty much means it will never happen, but it'd be nice to support it. You never know; they might be able to get it through on this Bricklink initiative instead. That is designed by Alex Hauer, might be Welsh as well, and there's 594 supporters and 412 days left.
Great, thank you, Will. So we can move on to our main podcast topic, which is our private member wagons. So these were something we started last year, and the basic idea behind them, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a second, is to build up long rakes of similar looking wagons at a similar scale, but with a variety of colours and maybe logo styles, that sort of thing, to build up good rakes to run at shows. And of course, since we've actually built our rakes, COVID happened and we haven't really had shows where we've been able to run them. So hopefully soon we will. The first segment we have on this is sort of a general history of what a private owner wagon is, and Matt's going to cover that for us.
Yeah, so private owner wagon states are pretty much the start of railways. And the reason private owner wagons came into existence was because it was beneficial for a lot of collieries and other large producers to actually own their own fleets, because they were often used in a single direction and returned empty, so it made more sense for them to have their own fleet because it meant less reliance on the railway providing them, and quite often they were hauled by a railway provider locomotive. Now, in the early days, sometimes you'd have a complete private train, so private locomotive and private wagons, and then it moved into private owner wagons on normal trains, and eventually it kind of led into other things. So obviously we had privately owned open wagons, privately owned vans, privately owned salt wagons, evolved into things where we had privately owned milk tanks. So for example, on a passenger train you might have a couple of milk tanks from a local station. The chassis would be owned by the railway, but the tank itself would be owned by the dairy or the dairy company. And obviously you had various manufacturers of private owner wagons. You've had various standard designs. So for example, a common designer, if you like, of private owner wagons was something called the Railway Clearinghouse. So you might have references to, for example, a Railway Clearinghouse 1923 7-plank, things like that. And that was just a standardised design that in effect was designed so that you could just build as many as you wanted that design, and it's all common components. So again, it was to do with ease of maintenance and reducing the sort of cost to maintain. And then eventually, obviously, we had the nationalisation of British Railways in 1948, and private owner wagons then stopped being a thing. They actually got taken into national ownership, and then they kind of wound down after that point. So it kind of, you would still see private owner wagons into the age of BR steam, but pretty much by the time you started seeing diesels, private owner wagons were pretty much non-existent. And then as of today, we don't actually have any private owner wagons on the UK rail network. They're all privately owned either by the freight companies or by one of the train operating companies, or they're leased in that way. So the private owner wagons as well, from a technical standpoint, actually came to a bit of a head, because not many people know this about British trains, but a lot of them weren't fully braked. So we didn't actually have fully continuous brakes on our trains. And private owner wagons were pretty much the only reason we still had uncontinuously braked trains. And it did actually go to Parliament at one point when the railway companies did want to force private owners to actually have brakes, or at least through brakes fitted to their wagons. And the government at the time decided that it wasn't beneficial for private owner companies to actually fit brakes to their wagons, or continuous brakes, on the basis that it was an excessive cost. So that's a little interesting tidbit of history for you.
Great, thanks, Matt. I think that was a nice roundup of private owner wagons. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the original idea. So I think private owner wagons, most heritage railways in the UK have some, at least a few. And it was an idea in 2020 that I discussed with Will, who has an open wagon, which is quite a common design for the private owner wagons, and we were looking for a fundraiser for the group to pay towards a new layout and other bits of the running costs for the group at the time. So we thought that might be a fun way to do it, and also to build up longer rakes of wagons. And I'm sure Henry may have some stats for us a little bit later on in the podcast about how many of this year's wagons should exist. Whether they've been built or not, I don't know. So we'll move on to a discussion with Will about the 2020 private owner wagon, which was a 5-plank open wagon, although in Lego it's actually a 4-plank open wagon because of the size of tiles. So what inspired the original model? Because you designed that before we'd come up with the idea of the sort of private member wagons.
God, I had a queue and it needed something to pull. It was one of those, I decided to design a truck, thought it would take me ages because I've never done one before, and it just sort of appeared fully formed. You know how it is. It's taken me decades to design a van, and that thing just got produced in seconds. No, it was literally just I needed something to go with the queue because it didn't really go with the Lego stock that I had.
Fair enough. I couldn't actually remember this when I was thinking about it. Did you make any amendments to your design before we used it as a private owner wagon for the LNUR?
I don't think I did. There was one suggestion you had, which I, on my ones, had never been a problem. And then subsequently, when I went to do the instructions of Block Junction, my own PO wagon, versions of the PO wagon had that problem, and I have fixed it since. But for the actual, for our one, no, I don't think I did make any changes.
Okay, so it's just a straight up. And that was something that you probably didn't collaborate with other members on at the time, because there was certainly more collaboration this year.
No, my attitude very much was, when you were discussing with me before, I was quite happy to do it that year, but I didn't want it to become buy Will's wagon every year. I wanted it to be a group thing, so I was extremely glad and very quick to vote for somebody else. Glad that somebody else has won this time, and quick to vote for that somebody else as it happens.
Yeah, it was a good change. So we'll talk a little bit about changes we made for the private owner wagon scheme in 2021, and Luke's going to talk to us about the specification. So the basic process was we had a specification and opened that out to members, so any member could submit one or more of their wagon designs for consideration, and this specification just made sure that actually it was going to work as a private owner wagon in terms of group fundraising, and also that it would look sensible. So Luke, would you like to talk us through the specification?
Absolutely. So there are 7 points to this, and I think a brief sort of explanation for each would be quite helpful. First of all, it has to be based on British rolling stock and are freight wagons only. Of course, it makes sense for it to be British because we are based in the UK, and freight wagons are easier to do than a passenger wagon. There are small passenger coaches out there, but people are going to naturally gravitate towards larger ones, and that could be a bit too complicated. Second point is wagons should make sense in a long rake, so members can buy multiple wagons. Like the open plank wagon, that was a really good sort of simple idea. You can get loads of those together in a long rake. You can buy all the parts and build them up nice and easy, nice and quickly, nice and cheaply as well. So that was kind of an obvious go-to as well. Third point is allows for some variety in colours of wagons, at least 3 or 4. This is the sort of thing where you can add some customization to it. So, of course, Lego bricks come in so many different colours. You can get, again, going back to Will's plank wagon, there are so many tiles you can place on the sides in different colours. You can go dark green, normal green, blue, red, yellow, any colour you can basically get your hands on so long as it's in that size. And that's definitely a good looking thing when you see a rake of like a dozen just in a line. Fourth point is allows for custom printing with space of at least 6 to 8 custom printable tiles. So this is another main point as well. For it to be custom towards the LNUR, it needs to have the space for LNUR, this member, where they're from, and a few other details that you would see on the real life wagon. Number 5, ideally we want to keep the private owner wagons to 7 studs wide. This is probably the only thing people could go back and forth on, but then again, it's not necessary to do so. 7 studs wide is, I believe, to be generally considered to be the go-to width for anything British for railway stuff, because it just matches that scale. When you look at how other Lego trains are built, 7 studs works both for locomotives and rolling stocks when it comes to being British themed. 6th point is physical built models are preferred, but not a total requirement. So this is more so just for the planning phase, where you have an idea for your wagon. Okay, I got to go ahead with this, but I don't have the bricks to make it how I want to. If you're going to build something, yes, a number of people, myself included, would rather something physical was submitted. But when you build something digitally, you've got basically every brick in your arsenal to make whatever you want. And the final point is we would like wagons which probably contain under 400 elements, make building multiple wagons more affordable and members. So this was something I pointed out a moment ago in one of the previous points. But yes, it's something that's small enough. You don't need to buy too many bricks. You don't need to have to fork out so much money to be able to put these wagons in the first place. And it is really nice, despite the fact, yes, it might sound a bit small when you think of it as under 400 elements. But even then, that's not quite what you think it is. Again, referring back to Will's open wagon, that's obviously matching this point in the specification, and you could build them up nice and cheaply, nice and easily, and to get them in that rake once again makes it look really good and is absolutely worth it.
Hey, thanks, Luke. I think that was really well covered. And that sort of explains a little bit about the processes and the things we had in our mind when we opened it up to voting. We didn't want every style of wagon because only certain things are going to work for it as a podcast, as a private owner wagon, and as long rakes that people are going to buy a couple of wagons off. And I think the first year was a big success. We ended up doing 2 runs. I think there are probably something like 50 wagons. At least people have paid for 50 sets of tiles or so. Whether people have actually finished building all of the wagons. One member did buy, I think, 6 wagons last year. So whether they've actually been built or not, I don't know. Okay, we're going to move on, and Trace is going to run us through some information about the other models which were submitted before we picked Henry's Conflat A wagon.
Yeah, so the way I'm going to approach this is I'm just going to go through what everyone submitted. And, I mean, there's no real reason why nothing was picked. Because Henry's is great, and it fits exactly what we want, but we had a lot of power come out when it came to talent of designing these wagons. So I'll start with going through the list. Renzo's. So Renzo also did a conflat. And what I really like about this, this isn't going to be a review. I take it all back. So starting with Renzo's conflat. It's similar to Henry's. It doesn't have the dip in the center of where that deck is. But I like the way that it's clean. It's just, no, this isn't a review. Renzo also did a conflat. His load is fantastic. Let's move on. All right, we also had Will voted his cattle wagon, which if you can check out Block Junction, you'll see that there's instructions for that already. Another fantastic wagon. LNUR member Nick submitted an M45 Tanker Wagon. Looking great, follows all the standards. The color of the tank is red. Another submission we had from Will was his ventilated van, another popular download, or at least another popular set of instructions from Block Junction. And I think that was all the submissions. Again, we had a lot of talent and a lot of great designs. I think Henry's was picked because it's very similar in style to Will's Block Junction designs. And there was a lot of very bold surfaces to put the printed tiles that we buy with the LNUR title, the name of the private owner, and such forth.
Great, thank you, Trace. Yeah, I agree. I think I was actually very keen on Will's box fan because we'd had the 5-plank open wagon, and I thought that would be a really nice thing. But I'm glad we went for the conflat because it's a bit different. And we can do a box fan another year anyway, or a tanker or something.
I think that the reason we went for the conflat as much as anything else was the fact that it was basically built by committee by the LNUR already. I mean, Renzo lost out, not because his was any worse or better or whatever than than Henry's, but because Henry literally designed it with the rest of the members of the LNUR on Facebook.
Yep.
Nice.
So over to Henry on that note. So what inspired your original model? What made you want to build the conflat in Lego?
Because just after you released the specification, no, it was just before you released the specifications, we were talking about private owner wagons in one of the LNUR chats, and we came across the idea of a conflat, and we all really liked it, those of us who were there. So as soon as you released that brief, I started working on it.
Okay, that's a good reason to start. And I think Will's already covered it to a little degree, but there was quite a lot of collaboration from various LNUR members. So do you want to talk us through what sort of changes and what help you got from members to kind of get the model to the state that we ended up releasing it in?
Yep. So when I was working on it for the brief, the whole time I was doing it, I was posting lots of pictures and later renders of it in the chat for some feedback. So I got it from a few members. I don't know exactly who then. And then Matt offered to help me with some of the undercarriage because I had no idea what's meant to be under it. So he did all that work for me. Thank you, Matt. And then that was about where it got to when it was submitted and then won. And then in the process of us refining the model, Will went through it and made a few further changes to it, which definitely made it a lot better in the undercarriage bit, because there are a few bits where it wasn't very stable. So thank you, Will.
What I do, somebody gives me a design, I make it structurally sound.
Yeah, Mr. Over-engineering. I think we also had some. A lot of members had a little bit of input in. So personally, from more of a design point of view, Pete, who is never on the podcast because he's a Luddite, he had a quick review of the original conflat when we mocked it up with some designs, and his comment was we'd originally only planned to put LNUR as text on the tile on the wagon, and in his own grumpy old man way, he said, no, that's not really good enough. So we went away, and we ended up replicating all of the text which is on the bottom of the wagon. So it says, please replace chain pocket lids, and it has a wheelbase and tar weight mention on them as well, and they looked so much better after that change. Otherwise it would have been quite plain. I think the original idea was to try and keep the tiles fairly really usable and interchangeable, so you could perhaps buy a couple of sets of tiles this year but reuse them in other wagons you were building personally as well if you wanted to sort of brand them up with the LNUR. But that was one change I was really glad we made. It looks loads better that way. Okay, I think we can move on. So we provide, as part of the private owner wagon, we provide some printed tiles which fit the wagon in whatever colour variations we can provide for the year. And we also send out some PDF instructions and a Bricklink XML parts list to members who purchase it so they can order all the parts. And from there, a lot of members sort of take it into their own hands and make their own changes and make their own modifications to the original design. And Andrew is going to talk us through some of those variations from the private owner wagons for both years now.
Absolutely. So as we've been saying, the general idea of these member wagons is to have a nice line rake of wagons on one of our layouts where they kind of look like they go well together, but at the same time, the members can add their own flair, their own personality to each wagon. So they kind of have their own representation on the layout. And also, when people are away from the public displays, they might want to just run the wagon on their own train set. So sometimes members just have their own personal needs. So yeah, there's been a few members who have added their own little tweaks to the original design that was in the PDF. As well as the colour changes that are available, there was also, on the open wagon at least, there was a few different... oh, bless you. On the open wagon, there was a few different printing options, as well as having your own name and your own sort of hometown. there was different designs of the logos, so that was another bit of variation people could choose from. But then, so as members started building their wagons for real, some started experimenting with different parts or different changes. So I remember the first one I saw was Pete's, who's not on the podcast. He took the wagon design and added a few little details, like a little lamp on the end and some brake pipes, I think. And he also added planking inside the open bit of the wagon, which was quite nice. Moving on from that, I kind of took his mods as inspiration. So I took, for my own wagon, I made the interior of the open wagon all brown inside, and also made some little changes to how the buffers were at the ends and things as well. The general idea is that they still would look okay when they're in the rake, so you're not kind of changing it too drastically. But at the same time, there's a bit of leeway for members to add their own spark. One member that did something quite interesting is we've got a member, Jonathan, who runs 12-volt trains, the old 12-volt system. And the old 12-volt trains have their own design of wheels and couplers. So Jonathan took the member wagon design and basically rebuilt the chassis to fit his 12-volt stuff. And it worked out looking really nice. It's kind of more of a traditional train set style feel, but also matching the member wagons in general. So that was pretty cool. Jamie, can bring you in here. I believe you've made a narrow gauge version of one of the wagons.
It is my intention to do so in the future. I've not actually got round to it yet, no. What I'm planning to do, however, is take one of the conflats and actually display one of my locomotives on it. But I will keep you updated if anything changes, of course.
All right, cool. Yeah, so one I can mention quickly, Richard, you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong. We're thinking of designing a custom wagon for one of the other LEGO user groups in Europe, Togloston. Is that the open wagon or the conflat?
That's right. So that we've actually built a copy, and I got the printing for it. So we'll try and include a photo in the podcast, in the YouTube version anyway. But yeah, we did so the LNUR color is kind of a dark green. Usually, I think it looks really nice on that. So we've done them a dark green open wagon, and the idea is that we'll swap with we'll swap them for one of their wagons of their own design, which they're going to custom print. And the Aussie guys are providing, I think, the Victorian Lego Gauge Railway would be next on the list to swap a wagon with. So we might get Henry building a conflat to send off to another club this year, maybe.
Yeah, I think that'd be really nice if clubs could start exchanging wagons like that. Moving on to the conflats. Sorry, say again?
Sorry, Andrew. It may look a bit out of place with British wagons on.
I don't think it will actually.
I guess the open wagon is quite generic, isn't it? So.
Well, the wagon they were talking about was also it was an open wagon with a tarpaulin top, I think, and theirs would fit in perfectly with ours. And you bear in mind, basically, in steam era, Australian railways look like British railways, and then when they started buying diesel, they went and got American ones instead. So actually, most of their steam era stuff would look really good with our stuff.
Okay. Moving on to the conflat, in terms of some of the mods that members have done, obviously the idea of a conflat wagon is it's kind of the base vehicle, and then you can put whatever you want on top of it. And the main design is to have one of those small containers on. But some members have added their own loads. So our member Lewis has put some crates of Yorkshire tea on his conflats, because why not?
Yes.
And another member, our own Henry, he's built a kind of miniature version of a Gronk, because of course we have to mention Gronks every podcast. He's made his miniature rainbow-coloured Gronk, and it's put on top of the conflat wagon, held down by some chains, quite securely actually. That thing's definitely not falling off. Luke, he's made a nice version of his conflat wagon where the container itself is made more black than the others, but he's also added some trimline lining, so that's quite nice, adding his own style to it. And then finally, this is something we can come on to. There's going to be a southern variant of the conflat wagon. Is that something Henry can talk about?
Yes.
Good.
So as a fundraiser we're doing for the southern layout, we're planning to do another run of tiles, but instead of all the prints being for the LNUR, they'll be for the LSUR, which is sort of the southern group of members, of which we've got a growing number. And so we believe we're going to offer them in dark green, and with, as you can see on the tiles, for those of you watching on YouTube, it will have an LSUR logo, which will be different to the LNUR one, as well as a Lego Southern UK Railway tile, and LSUR on the actual conflat tile as opposed to LNUR. So they'll be available at some point soon, probably. Ask Richard.
Hopefully soon, yeah. I think I'm about ready with the order form, so that's maybe a job I can finish after the podcast if we don't end up playing games, I suppose. I think there are a couple more variations we had missed. So one is Chris Miller's Iron Brew variations. So the first year he was lucky and was feeling kind, and we did a special print run of him of tiles for him on blue and orange for his Iron Brew wagons that he's got on his Glasgow Brick subway layout. This year he had to cope with just blue tiles because Fabrics, who print our tiles, did a really good job, but the administration and pain both I and them received trying to print the tiles last year was a bit of a nightmare. So we simplified it, which is why we had fewer colours available and no logo variations this year, and it was a lot smoother. So he has one, and also member Nick Drew actually managed to modify Will's open plant wagon into a box fan, which I'd forgotten about, in a lovely shade of purple. So I think that was all of the variations. Thanks,
I've got a few more to mention.
Oh, of course you do. Okay, off you go.
Okay, so Andrew has also done a slight variation of the 2020 design. He's done a brown inside to it, as well as some slight modifications to the outside in black and light bluish grey, I believe.
I did
That
quickly
looks
mention
very
that.
nice.
Yep.
Oh, sorry.
That's all right.
I've also done a modified version of this year's one with opening doors on the container, and currently I've stuck a few rockets inside, modified from the minifigure series one. Matt has also modified one, and he's done a few changes to the underside of it and a few changes to the roof to add a bit more detail. And then I've also done a smaller container that's half the size that you can sit either two of on the ends of the conflat or one in the centre. And then Renzo also has another one that he's done. So do you want to talk about that, Renzo?
But no, I stick to the same container as Henry designed because I was too happy with my own conflat design, so I had to build mine. I'm still struggling with the tile with the text. I think I have to make a custom one. And I also made my own conflat one with a United Diaries tank on it. So that's the few things I did.
Thank you, Renzo. Yes, so we can probably move on to just open discussion about the private owner wagons with all members, so feel free to unmute if you fancy joining in. I think the first question I've got, let's start with an easy one. So we've only done this for 2 years. Does anybody have a favourite wagon between the open wagons and the conflat? Let's make Henry cry, was my thinking behind this.
Yeah, I'm happy to make Henry cry because I think I prefer the open wagon. I think just because it's more common. I think when it comes to the conflat, it's not something I've personally even seen before. Not as a bad thing because it's nice to see some variety, but of the two, I definitely prefer the open wagon.
I think that's
Well,
fair.
I think conversely, actually do prefer the conflat. Not just partly because it isn't my design, and I've got plenty of my design already, of whichever wagon ends up entering. But funny enough, when everybody started talking about conflats, I was like, oh yeah, I can design one of them. I didn't think about it for 3 days. Went back to the chat, and Henry's was already so advanced. I was like, there is literally no point in me designing one of these. Henry's already got it covered.
I think that's fine.
Yeah, I prefer the conflat. It's more interesting.
I think the conflat is. I hadn't really heard of one before we started discussing it, although I'd probably seen them at some heritage railways, and we found a couple of reasonably good condition conflats at the Great Central Railway when we a couple of us went for a trip the other week, so it was quite nice to see. I think I find it very hard to pick. I really love both. I think they turned out really well. The first one's kind of a classic, and I think doing the open wagon that year was probably a really good choice. And of course, the open, Matt discussed there were a couple of different types of wagon used as private owner wagons, like the dairy wagons with a sort of common chassis. But conflats never really were properly, as lots of rivet counters pointed out on our Instagram account, conflats weren't technically private owner wagons. Yes, we know. We know. Okay. Yeah. Does anyone else want to join in on favourite private owner wagon? Trace.
I actually think both are pretty great, and I don't even think it's because of the vehicle themselves. They both offer the versatility to put really fun loads in and on them. So, like the conflat, you can carry anything. It's on display. It makes a nice set piece. And then the open wagon, I mean, you can fill it with whatever you want and really convey its own place in your layout. And so, it's hard to choose a favorite. They both serve my needs.
Will's already been. I think that leaves Matt, possibly.
Yeah, as much as I like the open wagons, I'm again going to have to go for the container because they are a bit different. And containers themselves, although later on it was more sort of the boring British Rail sort of colours, during the peak of like private ownery sort of stuff, again, a lot of container wagons, the containers themselves, some of them were actually owned by private companies, and there was a huge variety of containers. Although the one that's been modelled is a sort of generic enclosed one, there was also a wide variety of containers. So you had open-topped ones, you had, I think there was 1 or 2 tank-based ones, although they weren't that common. And then obviously you had some steel ones, you've had some refrigerated ones as well, which is something completely different. And then the other thing as well is that the containers have this wide variety of colour schemes. So primarily, obviously during the British Railway sort of era, they're primarily a brown colour or a dark red colour. But you've also got other ones which were, I think, you had like blue for LNER, you'd got like this dark crimson for LMS, you'd got the obviously chocolate brown for Great Western. Then you got like the private only ones, so you got like the white and blue, and I think there's some green, and possibly even a few more yellow into the mix as well. So the container wagon is a really great springboard for going, here's a standard wagon, but I'm going to completely change what's on the top of it. And the other thing as well, when I've been partaking in the early part of when we were looking at the containers, we also found that one of Preserve Railways has actually stuck a tractor on theirs. So although it's a conflat and designed for a container, you can actually go a bit more different with the load by having it or using it as a flat wagon and then sticking something like a tractor or a trailer, or as Renzo did with a milk tanker. And it's still a container wagon, but the load is completely different to what was provided as part of the member offering.
I think that's fair. I do like. I guess you could put a tractor in the open wagon, but it wouldn't make a huge deal of sense, I suppose.
Doors aren't big enough.
But, well, I was at the Great Central Manchester Mount Sorrel branch today.
Stop.
Sorry, Trace.
Oh no, you're fine. Keep going.
So, yeah, I was at the Great Central Railway Mount Sorrel branch today, and they had obviously private owner wagons because it was connected to the quarry, the granite quarry there. And now I really want an open wagon in probably light bluish grey with Maxwell Quarry on it. Whether I can afford the printing, because I think it would need to be over every tile on the side of the wagon, I don't know. Okay, we didn't ask Andrew about his favourite wagon.
So far, I've only built the open wagon. I missed the initial run of the conflats, just for personal preference. I think I probably would say I prefer the open wagons because I think they look better with lots and lots of them in the same rake. Although having said that, when we've been talking just now about all the different types of loads you could have on the conflats, then that makes it a lot more appealing to me. So I'm now considering maybe I'll have a go at building one, and maybe just think of something strange to put on top, like a drum of cable, for example, something like that.
A miller, he's pretty strange.
Yeah, why would you want to transport him anywhere?
Isn't this a very sensible podcast without him? It's strange.
We're doing our best to derail it.
Yeah, I know. It's normal. Okay, moving on to the next question then, as I think everybody who has wants to say something has probably been. What about the best colour for this year's wagons? So, I think Henry probably has the best memory. We had 6 colours this year. We had 9 the year before. And maybe actually, Henry, it's something I didn't cover when we were talking about your designs. How did we come up with the list of colours? Because obviously you can't build every Lego model in every colour because it just doesn't work sometimes, or it's too expensive, especially if we're doing big rakes.
So the way we went about it was, the first thing we did was we took the final model we'd come up with, and what colours can you get all these pieces in? And that gave us a list of, I think it was about 15 colours or so that you could do it in, and then a few more colours that you could do just by replacing the tiles with clips for an older style. So we had 20 or so colours on a short list that were possible. And then we narrowed those down based on a few conditions, such as some of them had very rare or expensive parts. So we discounted them because it'll make it a lot more expensive to build, especially if more than a couple of people wanted to. And then that narrowed it down. We also then went for sort of some standard colours like dark green and dark red, were both there last year, and they're fairly common colours that people would want to build in. We wanted a spread of colours, so we then chose blue because we couldn't do it in dark blue, sand green because that's quite different to the others, and then we were undecided on the 6th colour, so we had a vote in the LNUR Facebook group, and there were a few options: bright light orange, black.
We were robbed.
Black should have won.
We were robbed.
Can I continue?
Yeah, I suppose so.
Yeah, so bright light orange, which everyone says was robbed, red, light bluish grey, and black as a late entry. And the winner was red, and it was a democratic process, so it wasn't robbed. You're not Americans.
Robbed. Storm. LNUR.
One of them is.
All right.
Is Carter advocating that we storm his house? I think Carter's advocating that we storm his house.
Yeah, I just really miss you guys. That's why.
That sounds unlikely.
It's pretty unlikely.
Poor Matt's going to have to do a lot of editing.
This is the best bit.
He likes it really deep down. Yeah, so let's open that up to members. So what were their favourite colours from this year? What colours should have been on? I'm going to say light bright orange. I'm gutted that didn't go ahead.
I'm going to be a bit arbitrary here. I'm going to be arbitrary and say that red was the best one just because that's the colour that I chose for the printing. Even then, I still... I don't know. I don't do a lot of building in red despite how common the colour is with so many bricks. Because, yeah, I think for me it just looks nice. If not red, then dark green because it's the LNUR colour.
Yeah, dark green's a classic, and that was kind of a given because we did the open wagons in dark green, and I think it just looks really nice. Green, although LNUR is obviously based on LNUR, that wasn't really the regional color. Green seems to be the color. I don't know why. It just looks really good.
Oh, the standard
It's
railway
southern
colour.
green.
Henry says southern color woo in chat. Yeah.
I have to say, just because it's different, I'm quite fond of the sand green.
Oh yeah, sand green.
Oh,
think
it's
Grace has got a
lovely.
few of
You
them.
should definitely get them on the next round of tiles. The sand green stands out.
Does look quite good. So because we didn't really want to do 2 sets of artwork, I wanted to keep all of the artwork in white ink, which did narrow down some colours. So I think we ruled out a couple of colours like tan because there wasn't going to be enough contrast. Henry can probably remember a bit more.
Yes, I believe we ruled out tan and white based on limited contrast.
Yeah, printing
And
white
we
on white.
initially ruled out black based on no contrast between the pillars and the prints, but then we changed our mind and decided it didn't actually look too bad, or we could have changed it to dark bluish grey pillars and roof with black tiles.
Very industrial.
I don't think you need to necessarily have the pillars a separate colour. If anything, I almost feel like the main reason the pillars were black is the same reason certain parts of my open wagons were black, and that was it just wasn't worth the headache of finding colours with those brackets.
Yeah, maybe that might be a thing. So any more comments on favourite colours from this year or last year in the private owner wagons?
Yes, I liked that they did just regular brown because it looks quite a nice wooden colour, I would say. And as I mentioned, blue is nice because of the LNER connection, particularly the garter blue you see on some locomotives. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree, and I think dark reddish brown was I think another Pete request because that he liked everything in that colour.
Yeah, I selected the dark red as well, but I'm still sad that I think that was the same as you mentioned, Richard. The dark yellow orange kind of color. I don't know what's the official color, but
Dark orange.
Oh, it's a shame that.
No, it wasn't that one. It was
bright light orange.
Yeah, that was. Because if it comes to second round, I think I would go for the sand green because that's the most unique color in comparison.
I think we will probably do a small second run, but we'll have different color options and maybe a different logo to mix it up a bit. But we'll see. We do have the southern variation, but we're only going to do that in dark green. I think we decided, didn't we, Henry? Probably.
No, I'm
yes, that's what we decided.
Okay, I think anybody else have a final comment on colour before we move on?
Yes, so my open wagon, I went for what could be considered maybe a more boring colour, is just a light grey. Mostly because I quite like seeing that sort of thing out when I go to heritage railways. You see things like Great Western wagons or British Railways, whatever. And I think even though some of the more brighter colours would be quite fun, my general preference was just more to go for something a bit more prototypical or realistic. I was a bit worried that the white printing wouldn't be as much contrast on the light grey, but it turned out all right in the end. So
they do come up quite nicely. So thanks again, Fabrics. Maybe they should sponsor this episode. Maybe they should. I think you're right. I know. I think you're right in that the boring colours. I was quite against having very bright colours because they don't really look right in a lot of situations on a railway. Even if they were a bright colour, by the time a wagon's been around for a while, they get rusty and the colours fade a bit. So having
something era where they're covered in soot.
Yeah, they get dirty very quickly and they don't look the bright colours. I think that's why I like the dark green colour because it looks quite sort of dirty in a way already. We still do have a we were going to do a podcast, which is still on the list of episodes, about weathering wagons and trying to send a Lego wagon off to somebody to weather. So that would have been interesting. It might just ruin a load of Lego. Who knows?
Yes.
Yes, it will.
Yeah.
I have to say, I do not enjoy when people try and do Lego weathered wagons because it just looks like they didn't have the right pieces in the right colours.
Yeah. I think it's quite a hard thing to translate. Sorry, Trace?
I was just saying he's right. It's so hodgepodge.
The only way you can weather a wagon is to leave it in Pete's shed for about a month, and then the amount of smoking and general debris that existed in his shed will naturally weather a wagon like it would weather in the real world. The only problem is then you don't want to touch it anymore.
That could be a thing. Pete's weathering service.
It would certainly be an interesting challenge to use all your old bits, like where they were changed from like brown to reddish brown or dark grey to dark bluish grey. It would make an interesting challenge to combine those together into something that looks a bit more realistic that way.
I've got my old grey, light grey from the castle, and the new bricks, and the that they don't match in color. Gives you the opportunity to play with it, and I think that's what Jamie also says. It's a really cool idea.
What I do find is
He said that, didn't he? Yeah.
You can really take advantage of the fact that certain colours like dark red and dark green never match properly with any wagon that you're replicating planks, because then you've got the excuse for why that plank is a slightly different shape. That plank, maybe it's been repaired, or for some reason they've wiped that bit but not the other bit. And I'm building Southern Parcels van, and I've ended up with some off-brand, almost identical shade of colour, but not quite tiles. And I've actually decided to use them because the difference in shade looks like the paint's just weathered in that section. But it's very difficult to achieve that on a reliable basis because you're then having to look for odd shades of Lego, odd variations in Lego shades, or third-party parts that aren't easy to come by.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else? I think we can probably wrap that up. I think we've probably spoken about enough to do with colour. So moving on, what wagon would you like to see built as the private owner wagon next year? So I presume we're going to be running the same brief again next year, or a very similar brief. So what sort of wagons, if not a specific wagon, then a generic type of wagon like a tanker or something? What would people like to see? I can see Andrew lighting up.
Yeah, I think something like a tanker would be a nice change from what we've had before, or maybe even a hopper wagon. A hopper would also be nice to see in a full rake.
I was going to say that.
I was going to say, I know what Carter's answer is. Will, get your tanker sorted out.
I told you that. I keep saying that.
Will has. I did pester Will a lot for the brief to sort his tanker out, but there was the only sort of hold up on that you couldn't work out how to manipulate string.
String mechanics just utterly baffle me on Studio, and because you're having to modify it in 3 dimensions, you never get it right, and it's quite a complex curve around the barrel of the wagon. And quite frankly, I know I need to do it one day. I just don't want to.
You want me to have a go at some point? I've not got anything useful to do at the moment.
Yeah, just doing star signs and stuff, I guess.
Oi, watch it, or I'm not designing a wagon for next year, as you keep.
Well, you've already had one. You've had the glory now.
Okay, keeps telling me to design it.
Yeah, this is true.
Maybe you've had your 50 minutes of fame.
Back on topic then. So, what sort of wagon would people like to see next year? Henry.
I would also like to see a tanker.
Mm-hmm.
I am also designing one for when Will's not finished his yet.
Jamie, you're next.
Well, pretty much what Henry said. I would like to see a tanker. I've been very impressed by the one that Will displayed at Shildon, and if he doesn't get around to it again, I'm going to go have a bash myself. Might even do another tanker as well. So that's about it, really. Yeah, watch the space.
I could see Renzo lighting up, so perhaps Renzo has an idea again.
Yeah, I was only wondering, that the private owner wagon needs to be like in a row. You need a lot of them to put together.
Yeah, so I think for it to make sense as a fundraiser,
Yeah,
we want members to maybe buy a couple of them, probably to help with group funds.
yeah, I understand that one. On the other side, I think it's also a good opportunity to make it like your own, how do you say it? Just a shout out, like I'm a member of it, so I would like to go for the brake van. I would love to have an LNUR brake van.
Well, Heritage Railways do have. We did discuss a brake van, and we discussed passenger wagons as well, which we'll come back to in another.
I think the problem with brake vans is a very simple one. At most, you never want more than 2 brake vans in any train. So the problem with a brake van, also you don't really get private owner brake vans. It's kind of weird having. I mean, technically, it's weird having LNUR and LSUR on the Conflact, the actual Conflact wagon. But my personal opinion is, I don't think we've got enough brake vans in the group, and I don't think
we do have
doing an LNUR one makes a vast amount of sense.
Yeah, that's fair.
I mean, Heritage Railways do run brake van specials, and we have done that on our own layout as well.
Yes,
I think we did that less.
Run anything else?
Yep. Yeah, I mean, we are LNUR is 5 next year, next August. So we've been thinking about doing something like a special release for that. So maybe a brake van might make sense. Okay. Any more comments on wagons we'd like to see next year? I can't remember who's been. Trace, have you got a say on this?
I just want to say I can't wait to see the submission brief next year when it's just 5 tankers all going up against each other.
It sounds like it's going to be 5 tankers and that's it. Yeah.
Yeah, we've got 3 so far.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll be really annoyed if I get my act together, finally release the tanker, and you lot are going, "Nah, we want somebody else's."
Yeah, so far there's 3 of us planning it.
As long as it's all the more complicated and design 5 of my
Miller's milk, I will be so happy.
Oh no! Oh no! Yeah, I think. To be fair, I think Will's is the best tanker design I've seen.
Yep.
And there have been many.
Oh, that hurt.
Jim in Northern Brickworks has quite a nice one that was based on the Hornby model, didn't he? But I think he's taken those apart now. From what I remember.
Yeah.
If I'm honest, I really like Renzo's tanker that he's got, that new Imperial Milk.
Yeah, that's
quite
cool,
nice.
actually.
Yeah, no, I think that looks great.
Okay. Any more on other wagons we'd like to see?
I would like to see us do an LNUR Shunter, and I think it should be Trace's Terrier.
Yeah, seconded. Approved.
This is the next.
It's available at Block Junction.
Damn it. So we do have, the next question, which this sort of leads into, is if we were going to do a member loco, what should it be? And there's only going to be 2 answers, and I already know this. It's going to be Terrier or Bronc.
And the Bronc has a problem in that we don't actually own a design we can sell.
Yeah, there is that. Although we do know Maceo because Maceo does help with the Brick Train Awards, so I'm sure he'd be happy to let us have it. But yes, good point. I think we're gonna go down the members list for this, and Henry is first on my list. So Henry,
Terrier, Rainbow Terrier.
Yeah, this is going to be really predictable, isn't it, Jamie?
Yes.
Well, as you know, I do a lot of narrow gauge. I think maybe a small narrow gauge locomotive, even just for display purposes, would be ideal because you can put your name on the side of it, name on one side and maybe your location on the other, something like that.
Good work. At least
and with the narrow gauge ones, we can just put them on our conflats.
Also
precisely, yes.
Luke.
If we're going to have to pick between the Gronk and the Terrier, it's going to be Terrier. You know me, I want Steam. But it makes sense that it has to be a tiny model, like an 040 or an 060.
Yeah,
again, of the two main options, Terrier.
something smallish would be good. Matt, you're up next.
I'd probably pick something like an Avonside or a Hunslet saddle tank.
I knew you'd have a more interesting answer. Thank you.
Oi, 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 oi. What about mine? Come on.
Yeah, Jamie's was quite good. As well.
Yours lacks
Thank
the practicality due to the fact that nobody else has any narrow gauge, Jamie.
Just stick it on a conflat.
Yeah.
Well,
So, I mean, obviously, I would like the Terrier, but I'd also consider the me pocket rocket design as somewhat generic, but sort of, it fits in any steam railway, and it has the major advantage of relying a lot less on third-party parts. It only needs third-party wheels.
Also true. Yeah. Renzo.
Yeah, I'm gonna say something stupid, but I just like too much designing the steam trains myself. So I would like to have no bother with designing a Gronk one day. So I would like to have to buy a Gronk. And
What about your Ginty?
it's not my Ginty, it's Carl Garrick's Ginty, and I just
Okay.
bits about it. So it's not. It's. I love the train, but no, I would love to see a LNUR Gronk. I think we all should have one. And if I'm not gonna bother building my own.
Everyone needs one, I think.
Problem is, I've already got one.
I think the sort of comment about the Ginty is sort of nudged my memory in the right direction. And actually, I really like Rory Falconer's Austerity. That would be quite a nice one if we had to have a kettle. I guess I could live with that one. Still not a member, but one day. Trace.
All right, so I'm going to paint a quick picture for you. I'm thinking either like a web coal tank or a Ginty, where it's something with those huge water tanks so we can fit a lot of detail on it. And I'd love to see the LNUR logo, almost as it is now, where it's in that football-shaped ring, but then it also says Lego Northern on one side, UK Railway on the other side. I just think that would look so classic.
Ooh, that sounds really expensive in printing. But yeah, doable.
Also, that would annoy the hell out of me. That you've got to have the same thing on both sides.
Oh yeah, same thing on both sides. That would annoy the crap out of me, I think. The football shaped logo is the LNER. I think it's the 1930s logo, isn't it? It's their sort of eyelet.
Yeah.
Logo.
Yeah, you're right.
It's their promotional logo.
Yeah, it's pretty iconic, I would say. I really love it, and that's why you picked it as a member logo for 1 year. Okay, Andrew, I think is the only person left to go.
Yeah, so I'm going to chuck in something a bit different, just to add a bit of variety. I'm going to say the Sentinel Steam Shunter. I'll just drop a link, picture in the chat. Basically, it's a steam loco that looks a bit like a diesel shunter. It's kind of just like a box on wheels, but it's got nice flat sides, so you can put some printing on. It's something a bit different.
I mean, if you're going to do a steam engine that looks like a box on wheels, you do have to do the is it Y4, the can't remember the J number for it, but the
J70.
Yeah, J70, the Wisbeck and Upwell trams.
For you laymen, it is Toby, the tram engine.
Yeah, I was going to say that.
You're going to have to paint down to the lowest common denominator.
I know Pete has a nice model of that, or at least a nice design.
Yes, I like Pete's design a lot.
Very true. Pete will be very happy with one of those.
His most popular loco is a kettle. He'll be just devastated. But
The only thing I'm not quite sure of is how good it would look in different colours other than just brown.
I've done a couple of renders of it in different colours. There are a variety of liveries that go, but not many.
I was sort of hoping that Andrew might say he was going to build one of his A1s for every member, but that has not worked out okay.
Yeah, we should just get everyone to build a Iron Brew A1, and then we're sorted.
The frustrating thing about his design is you could probably build it in Iron Brew colours, but you can't even build it in dark green or dark blue.
Okay, I think we can probably move on from that one. This is a good one. So we were talking about the wagon swap with other LEGO train clubs. We have a dark green 4-plank open wagon to Center Togklonten in Denmark. Where should we send the conflat, and what colour should it be, I guess, is the answer. So the Aussies are pretty keen to do a swap. I think Enrico's Dutch train club, and it's Lowlands Model Lego Train Club. Lowlands Model Train Club, I think. One of those varieties of word ordering.
The people in front of Judea.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. So where should we send our next wagon, and what? Well, presuming they want to do a swap, and what colour should it be?
We could do it with
Henry. I think Henry gets to go first because it is his wagon.
I don't mind where we send it, but I think I either do the dark greens because that's kind of our LNUR colour.
Dark green is a classic.
The dark red.
Yeah, it looks quite good. To be fair, it looks good in all of the colours I've seen so far this year, but I think dark green is our classic club colour, really.
We really need to do a trade with one of the American groups because all their wagons are 4 times the size of our wagons, so we get 4 wagons.
Yeah, that's fair. We should probably swap with like Texas lot or
Penlog or something like that. We'll have one of your USRA standard box cars. That's fine. Don't worry. We'll take the hit.
We might have to send a couple of them across for them, I guess.
Yeah, it doesn't work so well when you do that, especially since our couplings are probably more expensive than theirs.
Yes. Oh, that is very true. Yeah. So Henry has been. Will, do you want to chip in?
All right, that's
your answer.
Mind. Whoever's interested.
Fair. Well, what? Okay, maybe let's rephrase this question. So, which wagon would we want from another club in exchange for one of ours? I think Will's got the right idea. Let's go for. We'll have a massive American one.
Yeah, that sort of line of thinking does make sense. It's just so long as we get something back that doesn't resemble what we currently have. We don't want something that resembles a conflat. We don't need another open wagon. A massive box car from America. Yeah, sure, that'll be a really good standout model to have.
You say you don't want sort of the American equivalent of conflat, but wouldn't it be interesting to have the American version next to a British version?
Well, yeah, that sort of thing. But just so long as it doesn't look too similar, that was my only concern. If we does that make sense? You know, if you put a British conflat next to an American conflat, but it looks too similar.
No, it was very small because the American flat wagons are all sort of big bogey things.
Yeah, American wagons are massive, anyways.
They'll be a stud wider, and they'll be about 4 or 5 times the length of the conflat.
If I may, gents.
Go on, Matt. Say something sensible.
The Americans didn't actually have conflats.
Yeah,
I think that. Yeah.
Conflat was just an example.
Just to rain on your parade.
My parade is rated on. Thank you very much.
They had they did start container-like things, so they had a conflat with, well, a flat wagon with a couple of containers on it. But you're talking about something that was in the late 50s, early 60s, and that would possibly work. But again, that wouldn't really be on par with a conflat. One thing I probably would suggest that would probably be quite good is if we had something like a ferry wagon or something like that, because I know that they've at least been on our shores from ferry trains and that sort of thing. And I know there's been at least one of the photos, and I can't remember which book it's in, but it's a Great Western pannier tank with a Italian, I believe, ferry wagon behind it. From when it's been exchanging with stuff at the docks, so that's a nice little thing, and European wagons would actually fit on LNUR layouts as well, whereas as people who went to Thirsk well know, American stuff is a lot bigger than British stuff.
Maybe it's a silly question, but why do we want to swap the wagon instead of letting them sponsor, like exchange the sponsorship? Like that, I would love to see a typically American container driving around a layout in America, but with our logo on it, like LNUR logo on it, and we have our conflat with our container, but it says it's the Lego Club Texas, and so
we did discuss that, and it might be an option, but part of it was wanting some more interesting varieties of wagons from around the world, I guess.
Yeah, but it's gonna be okay. I get that one, but it's gonna be really silly. Like the if you go for the Dutch group, they have such different stuff. You get a really silly train with all kinds of things.
It's not necessarily for running. You probably, I mean, we'd probably put the swapped ones into a siding or something, I guess, display, because they're a talking point with, and then people can see that it's not, we're not just the only weirdos who do Lego trains. There are people all around the world who do Lego trains who are just as weird as us.
I think then it would be more cool to have one train running around and with all those different containers showing off, like the weirdos are located here, located there, and spend some money on expensive printing on tiles and make just a lot of containers. Then we don't even need all those conflats, but we can just make some place where all the containers are stacked, like make the Danish red and blue cross, like something like that.
On that subject, there has been discussion of just doing the old container swap idea. The simple problem is, like, any American standard container is still going to struggle to fit on
just
a
too
British
big for
layout.
us. Yeah. We've discussed a lot of levels of swap. One is just simple 1x8 bricks to swap with members, and then wagon swaps and containers. So yeah, there's been a lot of ideas discussed, and Lego train clubs are voluntary and they run quite slowly usually. So
yeah.
Okay, let's move on. So we've sort of touched upon this a little bit in the podcast so far, but what about the private owner wagons have largely been freight so far, and we're talking about this in the LNUR sense, so maybe better to call them private member wagons. What about passenger wagons? What could we have discussed this kind of privately as a group with some people anyway. So I think from my point of view, we discussed it, and there wasn't maybe enough variety in the colours, and there wasn't enough space for very obvious printing. But what about passenger wagons?
I think one day in the future we can get passenger wagons to work, and to try and keep to kind of the smaller, more simple stuff. Will has recently produced some four-wheel passenger coaches for Block Junction, so if anything, that would be a good starting point. There's 4 different color designs. There's a few different designs of the coach itself that you can go from. Yeah. So even if it's just that, that is still that good starting point. But there would definitely be an option in the future for a much better, potentially longer passenger coach.
I'm not a big fan of the idea. I don't think you can put your name location.
Yeah, I'm not either, but just because of it's being brought up, I think it's the only doable, or at least the only thing that's
I think it would have
prevented.
to be quite a small coach to make it viable. But I mean, even before the private owner wagons, we did have the LNUR Mark 0.5s, which were sort of collaboration between, I think it was Darren and Will, maybe other people.
It was my design with Darren, I think Matt, Nicholas, somebody else involved. I think it was just us 4. If I've forgotten somebody, I apologise. But yeah, basically my design, and the original plan was I was just going to send the designs to everybody and then they buy their own wagons. What ended up happening is I got a load of parts donated, a load of money donated, and they're told to get on with it, so I did. But the problem is those coaches were designed to be as cheap as humanly possible. And
yeah, I mean, they look fine running around the layout.
Yeah, they still cost about... I mean, the cheapest estimate for one coach was about 25 quid, but by the time we'd ordered 4 of them, you were looking at closer to 40 due to the limit of parts. And that is the problem. Like, coaches, like, compare that, not so much to the Conflat, because that was a little bit more expensive, compared to the 4-plank wagon. It's just the difference in price is off-putting, and it's like, my attitude is, the last thing anybody ever thinks about is building trucks normally. Most people will build themselves a couple of coaches to go with their logos, and then they'll think, I should probably do some trucks. And they also take a lot more space, they're a lot heavier, and they're a lot harder to customize. So I don't see it. It doesn't work for me.
I think Matt's had quite a nice idea in chat as you've been talking about that. So Matt, do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so one of the suggestions we could do is we're talking about coaches. Well, something we could do is backdate the coaches we're doing to early era sort of Stevenson's rocket style coaches, which are very basic, very much a stagecoach, but on train tracks. Because they're a lot smaller, they're a lot more compact. You can do them in 6 wide, and the level of detail is a lot more simpler. So you'd be able to do them in a lot more brighter colour schemes, more varied colour schemes, and because of that sort of time era, they literally would be, bright blues, bright yellows, bright greens, even two-tone schemes.
Can I interject there? Little known fact about the colours of those wagons: they're not based on the colours the wagons actually were, nor is Rocket. They're based on the colours that the LMS decided to do at the the 100th anniversary when they built those replica wagons. So it's generally considered by most historians that no coaches would ever have been that bright.
It's still a historical thing, but yeah, I think I personally love yellow, as most people know. But yeah,
one thing I'd add for having a member coach is I just don't think they lend themselves as well to having lots of different colours in the same rake.
No, this is also true. Yeah, coaches tended to be uniform, so yeah, I think that's a fair point.
I mean, also it's like people saying, Luke suggested my coaches. They're not that cheap. If I'm brutally honest, it's like compared to a wagon, they're quite expensive. Because getting the right, in whatever color design you go for, you always end up with one piece that's just a little bit more expensive than you'd like. Not ideal for a member wagon, if I'm honest.
Yep, I think that's probably fair. Does anyone else have anything else to say on that topic?
Only that I think it wouldn't really work, like for a lot of the reasons people have said.
Yeah,
and financially, the Bricklink probably, especially given that because of Brexit, we're in Britain, we're kind of limited to getting parts from Britain unless we want a lot of hassle. If you have people trying to buy 30 coaches at once on Bricklink, with all the difficulties we have getting anything abroad, it's not going to be fun.
I think part of the reason I didn't order a dark green container for my conflat was between my designs and the LNUR, I'm not sure how many dark green tiles are left in the UK.
They actually weren't too bad, I don't think. I managed to get hold of them okay, and they maybe weren't the cheapest tiles, but they were
1x2s, which again coaches would need. The 1x2s are getting to the point where they're becoming very expensive.
Yeah, there are some Bricklink sellers in the UK who do mass imports from Europe, like Bricks and Bloom, I think, does that. So,
what we need to do is convince some Bricklink sellers to pretend that the Blue bricks are Lego bricks, because they're looking like the most viable option if they'd actually ship.
Okay. So I think that's probably us for the podcast. I think we've covered everything we wanted to talk about today. So thank you very much for listening. And don't forget, we're on Instagram and YouTube and Facebook and Twitter as LNU Railway or LNUR Railway. And we'll see you for the next podcast.